As you all know by now, this is a channel dedicated to music, but this week I'd like to talk about something else I enjoy: comics. This will definitely not be a regular thing, as my primary interest is, and always will be, music, but I just wanted to do something a little bit different today to shake things up a bit. Now, a comic book run is what you get when one writer works on the same title or character for a lengthy period of time. So today I'm counting down my personal favourite runs ever. Joshua Williamson's run on Ghosted. This is a relatively new series that only began a few years ago, but my god has it been great so far. This is basically Ocean's 11 with a supernatural flavour, and it has a cast of quirky characters working together to get super rich. Although this is fairly rudimentary stuff, it's the amazing characters and visceral terror that make this title great. Protagonist Jackson Winters is strong-willed, unlike the main characters of similar books, and the moment he doesn't trust somebody on his team, he'll actually do something about it. Ghosted gets away with having a familiar premise because it avoids the typical character clichés in this genre, and on top of that, Goran Shujuka's creepy artwork really sends chills down your spine. Mark Millar's run on Ultimate X-Men. This is far and away my favourite version of the X-Men, and it's written by one of my favourite writers. Not only does Ultimate X-Men feature fast, thrilling storylines with excellent action scenes, but it's also a very unique take on this revered superhero team. You see, this series features a teenage version of the Children of the Atom, and that suits them down to the ground. Mutants have always been discriminated against in the Marvel Universe, but making them teens here just makes it feel even more real. I mean, that's an age at which you feel very alienated from the crowd, so Millar draws some pretty clever parallels here between teenagers and mutants. John Byrne's run on Superman, the Man of Steel. This is a series that just does everything right. For one thing, Superman is nowhere near as powerful in this series as he was before, giving John Byrne's run a real sense of peril and tension. The other thing that puts this Superman run above all the others is that the stories are extremely varied. John Byrne did a splendid job of showing all the nooks and crannies of the DC universe, so every arc feels new, fresh, and therefore exciting compared to what you'd find in some other Superman runs. Finally, it's held together nicely by some peerlessly eye-catching artwork to boot. Mark Waid's run on Daredevil. Now, Old Hornhead has had the fortune of being written by a lot of talented people in this industry, but Mark Waid's take on the character is the one that appeals to me the most. Everything I admire about this legendary scarlet-clad hero remains intact, from his unique powers to his serious dedication to his role, but that's the case for pretty much any run on Daredevil. What's so special about Waid's Daredevil is that after suffering so much horrible shit during the Bendis, Brubaker and Diggle years, he's now actively trying to find happiness in his life. Who can't relate to that? Geoff Johns' run on Green Lantern. This was my introduction to comics, ladies and gentlemen. Well, just gentlemen, I think. And what a way to start it was. Green Lantern's universe is pretty out there, with lots of bizarre alien worlds, creatures, and weapons, but the characters presented in Geoff Johns' version are so realistic and complex that they make it all pretty damn believable and swallowable. Hal, in particular, feels like a real three-dimensional person in that he's flawed, but his intentions are always good. Sure, he can be reckless, but when you read this run, you'll see that he behaves in this way in order to save people more quickly. His eagerness to jump into dangerous situations just shows how much he wants to help others, and that's pretty noble. Also, pretty much every villain in this series is compelling, intimidating, and has a good motivation to do evil. Next we have David Michelinie's run on The Amazing Spider-Man. This is, hands down, the best Spider-Man run ever. Not only is the artwork detailed, rhythmic and stylish, but the writing is top-notch as well. Peter Parker was a groundbreaking character in the 60s because he was one of the first superheroes to have regular human problems, and given that he's an adult in this run, the problems are tenfold now. Employment, taxes, relationships, it's all there. But the fact that Spidey's struggles are amplified makes it even more satisfying when he comes out on top. The dialogue is phenomenal too, and the interactions between MJ and Peter are beautifully written. Similarly, Spider-Man's one-liners have never been funnier. Next is Roy Thomas's run on The Savage Sword of Conan. Inspiring doesn't even begin to describe the Savage Sword, not just because it inspired many other sword and sorcery writers decades later, but also because it inspired and continues to inspire me. Conan is self-reliant, doesn't take shit from anyone, and whenever somebody has the audacity to make him look silly, he sticks a sword in their face. Okay, maybe I've never done that, but what I'm trying to say is that this series shows the importance of standing up for yourself and not letting anyone make a fool out of you, and that's really poignant. It also has stories that are longer and more eventful than those from other comics at the time. And while I usually hate the copious narration seen in comics from the 60s and 70s, it's so masterfully written in this title that I can overlook it. In fact, I've learned many new words from reading the narration boxes in The Savage Sword of Conan. Garth Ennis's run on Preacher. As you all know by now, Ennis is one of my top 5 comic book writers of all time, and I consider Preacher to be his masterwork. With fluid pacing, intense violence, and plenty of tasteless shock humour, you'd be crazy to not find something to like in here. You'd also be hard-pressed to find a comic anything like this one. I mean, it's about a Texan preacher who gets possessed by a powerful godlike spirit and goes around on adventures with his ex-girlfriend and a hard-drinking Irish vampire whilst dodging a deadly apparition of John Wayne. Tell me that isn't creative. And my favourite comic book run of all time is Sam Keith's run on The Max. Yup, it turns out that not all 90s comics were totally vapid. Some actually had something to say. This ambitious, almost art house series follows a homeless man who is also a large, burly superhero in an alternate reality called the Outback. Is the Outback just his imagination, or is it real? That's up to you to decide. But what you do need to understand is that the fantastical adventures he has in the Outback often serve as metaphors for the problems he's going through in his real life, so the danger is always genuine, regardless of the Outback's questionable existence. But anyway, The Max is one of the most moving comic book series I've ever read. The main reason why I love it so much is because of the titular character himself. He has such a miserable life in our world, one in which he has no home, no money and no friends, but he still keeps on living and finds joy in his other life as the Max. The main message seems to be that no matter how bad your life gets, you can always escape from it just for a moment with your imagination. Even if you're not usually into something this unconventional, you have to admit that that's a very inspiring message.